Wow, what an all-star cast. This is great. What a great way to conclude this, this seminar. Joy, I'm going to start with you. You're on the spot, pal. And I'm going to start, I happened to do a column from, I was in India last week, and I did a column on, well, AI's disrupting the outsourcing industry. And so we have comments on our columns, and I was reading the comments because they're particularly interesting this week. And there was one letter there that came in that made me think of you in our prep call. And the letter was from Robert W. in San Diego. And he said, a letter to the editor, what we call AI is really just machine learning. My cats display some intelligence. If I come home from the store with a bag of things and toss them on the couch, my cats will run to the bag to see what's in it. They will smell it and pat at it because they wonder about it, just like our ancient ancestors looked up at the stars and wondered what those points of light were. It's a sign of intelligence. A computer will never wonder about the world or anything in it because it's not intelligent. And I was thinking about it because when we talked, you said one of the things you thought was really important, that we not think of AI as some totally new thing, that it's really just extended intelligence, machines increasing the power of machines, and that your big concern is putting this power, this amplified power, in the hands of technologists not really prepared for it. Mm-hmm. Please elaborate. Mm-hmm.
All right, so let me describe extended intelligence and talk a little bit about that. So actually Norbert Wiener, MIT professor 50 years ago, wrote this great book called The Human Use of Blood. Hmm. And I think corporations are superintelligences. They're this aggregate of all these people, not necessarily more wise than humans, but they are more complicated. And we can barely manage them. And the way I think about intelligence, we already have machines in the system. And I think of AI as sort of jetpacks and blindfolds that are going to come on and just send us careening in whatever direction we're already headed. And so it's going to make us more powerful, but not necessarily more wise. And I think that a key thing is to get our house in order before these jetpack comes on. And I think a lot of the presentations before were about that. I think the problem has been that a lot of machine learning and AI has been in the domain of engineers, and it has looked like a technical problem. And it's been very difficult for, even though we talk about explainability, a lot of the explainability has been explainability between technical people. And it's not explainability to courts, it's not explainability to political systems. And when you look at the code, a lot of the technology people say, oh, we're just technical. We don't deal with racial problems. We don't deal with the political problems. Weirdly, when you look at the law, they often say the same thing too. Torts law says, oh, if you run over a rich person and a poor person at the same time, we pay the rich person more because our job in torts is not to deal with redistribution. We're just trying to technically keep the status quo. So one of the really interesting things is that the technology people and the law people, which are both kind of necessary to get this right, have kind of punted on the politics piece. And I think we're getting to the point where, as these things are getting deployed, this interface between society and engineering is not yet tuned to the point where we can integrate society. And I think we have to do that. And to me, I think that's why this college is so important, that interface has to happen before we put these jetpacks and blindfolds on.
Well, it's a good segue to you, Megan. You said the College of Computing should also have the best community organizers, the best school of social scientists, the best justice technologists. So you produce bilingual scientists with a heavy emphasis on the non-CS part of the job.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we have an incredible EECS department at MIT, extraordinary. We don't need to replace that or replicate that. Computing is really for anything. And it was so interesting to me as US CTO, by way of example, we think computing today is for certain things, self-driving car, precision medicine, these topics, and yet why is it also applied to any topic? I'm wearing CS for all. CS for all people to have hands-on keyboard designers, but CS for all topics. And the challenge, like if I as CTO would have gone to HHS, Health and Human Services, $1 trillion agency, and I went to H, and I went to a meeting of precision medicine, they'd say, oh great, let's get started. If I went down the hall to the foster care meeting, HS, they'd be like, why are you here? Like, my computer's working. Right? And these are extraordinary people. Like our civil servants who work in HS are just amazing. Like they know more about these systems and just as those things. So I guess one of the key things that I hope for this is that I hope that we're going to do a lot of computing on foster care solutions. I think we should do some computing on equality, rural child poverty. Like we feed 22 million children in the free and reduced lunch program during the school year, and we can only get to 6 million of them in the summer. That's a big data problem. I think it's more important than self-driving cars. I love my friends who work on self-driving cars, but there's lots of us who could work on lots of things. And so one of the things I'm really excited about for this computing college, the College of Computing, and I thank everyone who's working on it, is that we really could not just diversify tech, but we could techify everything else, and we could really work on the hardest, I have the SDGs on, the hardest problems together in this collaborative way. It's such an opportunity. It involves not only actually solving some of the ethics problems, would be bringing some of these topics into the mix of the code and some of these other humans in the mix of the code. We're super lopsided on who gets to speak, who gets money, who gets to set the agenda. This is really silly. And I call it TQ, like tech quotient. Like let's add the TQ to everything and we can really embrace solving a lot of things. And I think we'll start going in the right directions if we have blindfolds on.
So I haven't checked this, but I'm going to make a bet that there was not a single question on the implications of AI in the 2016 debates for president. Can you imagine that happening in 2020?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's going to happen. And it was interesting because we're moving so fast that I remember when Secretary Fox, who was Secretary of Transportation with Secretary Carter, when he came to be confirmed, the Secretary of Transportation, there were no questions on tech. And by the time he finished, self-driving cars and UAVs and all that. So we're moving fast, and yes, it'll be there.
So Darren, I want to test out, I've got a book idea, and I want to test it out on you since you're here. It sort of goes like this. I actually wrote a book a couple of years ago, Thank You for Being Late, and they argued that the world's being reshaped by three accelerations, what I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So technology, globalization, climate, biodiversity, loss, population. Three giant accelerations. And people are polite, so they often come up to you and say, hey, you're writing a new book. And I'd say, well, I just wrote a book about the three largest forces on the planet, reshaping. I don't have three new ones this year. And that actually got me thinking about what is going on. And what is going on, it seems to me, is all of them are going deep. And the book I think I'd like to write would just be called Deep, because I think all these things are now going at a deep level. It was very interesting being in India last week because Jio, this new cell phone company by Reliance, has so driven down the cost of cell phones that suddenly a couple 100 million more Indians are getting access to the network now. And because it got cheap, and now they're able to go deep in wholly new ways. Of course, if you watch the Oscars, what was the song of the year? It was Shallow. But actually, the verse is, I'm off the deep end, watch as I dive in, I'll never meet the ground, crash through the surface, where they can't hurt us, we're far from the shallow now. And I think we're far from the shallow now. And so you've talked about public interest technologists. Megan, Joe, you're all really talking about if we go deep without the philosophical, legal, ethical norms around just behavior and privacy, we're going to be really far from the shallow. What are your plans at the Ford Foundation to address that problem?
Well, first, I think if we are going to go deep without a view as to whether AI can advance justice and whether it can strengthen our democracy, if we're going to engage in this enterprise without those questions driving our discourse, we are doomed. Mm-hmm. If we do not understand that there is a difference between private interest and the public interest, and that space is contested. We saw that space in the Zuckerberg hearings, where we had powerful senators asking this CEO basic questions about how to turn their computer on.
The question was actually, how do you make money if you give it away for free?
Because quite frankly, in any other sphere of importance in our society, at a congressional hearing, there would be some smart person sitting behind that congressperson, passing them notes, saying, ask him this, he's wrong, challenge him, the data says this. And there's someone sitting behind in health, the environment, human rights. There was no one sitting behind those senators because there are very few people on the Hill working in the public interest on this larger issue of this fourth industrial revolution.
Why is that?
Because MIT and Stanford didn't train them to go to the Hill. And that's the potential that this new Schwarzman College offers, and why I think what Raphael and Steve and the others here are doing is so potentially transformational for higher education and more broadly society.
Yes.
Because if we don't have a view about the public interest, if we can't even define what is the public interest in this conversation, then we won't work for the public interest. The professor said a moment ago, I'm very excited about AI. If I'm a black man on parole or about to be paroled, I'm not excited about AI.
Why not? Talk to us.
Because the way in which predictive analytics is driving decisions as to who gets paroled and who doesn't is having a pernicious effect that is in fact reifying and amplifying the very human biases that we see reflected in our society. So the potential of AI should be to help correct the inherent biases, the historic biases that play out every day in America. But it's not doing that. And the answer can't be, we don't know. That can't be the answer in a society where inequality is growing and where those who have historically been marginalized and disadvantaged are having their disadvantage compounded. So will AI be a leveler, or will AI simply compound the disadvantage and bias that is already built into our systems and structures?
You know, I lived through this. I've been at the New York Times for 40 years almost, and I lived through this transition because I worked for a news organization that was basically, for most of its life, printed on a dead tree, on paper. And over here we had a regulator who said if somebody wants to run an ad on your dead tree, they have to identify where the money comes from. And over here we had an editor who said if you make a mistake on the dead tree, you have to correct it. And on top of the dead tree, we had readers and advertisers. Then along came Facebook. And they said, no. We're not a dead tree. We're a platform. We don't need any of your regulators. We don't need any of your editors, but we want all of your readers and all of your advertisers. And we didn't know what to do. And they were kind of cool. And we were sort of old, dead tree journalists. And so we did the only thing we knew how to do, and that was trust them. And they completely violated our trust. I mean, not ours, I mean the community's trust. By scaling their platform helter-skelter without building in the editors and the implicit regulation. Do you think there's any rolling that back?
No.
We have to engage, and we have to talk about the things that we don't like talking about, or at least elites don't like talking about, like regulation and redistribution. Because unless we are prepared to have a system that is fairer, then our democracy is going to be undermined. So the question for me is, who's going to write the regulation? Because actually, there's a dearth of talent in Washington who even understands the fundamentals of that platform.
Or so you were saying no. Elaborate.
For full transparency, I serve on the board of the Ford Foundation, and I think Darren's foundation on It's our problem it's our problem that was created, and it's our problem to solve. My reaction of no is in the administration that we're in today, I don't think that there's any interest whatsoever in pulling back anything that would point that towards more justice, more equality, more freedom, less regulation, right? I think, or more regulation.
Bad time for government to be on vacation
It's
at a
a
giant
really bad
inflection
time,
point.
and that's what I'm nervous about. I'm nervous about the fact that we're moving. I love Joey. I love your analogy. We're moving really fast, and in a week, it's like a year, right? So a year has passed in a week, and we have probably a couple of more years. By the time we get to the point where we realize that there's something that we must do to actually right the ship will be in the middle of the ocean. That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about Schwarzman College, and I'm so excited about being here at MIT. Because at the heart of MIT is this idea that hearts and minds, hands, can actually all come together for the better good. And this is not only about getting a whole bunch of good computer scientists writing these great, good programs. It is about making the world a better place. And we have to actually figure out a way to mix this together. There is not a lot of other checks and balances out there. You said something that was really interesting. You said, but we trusted them. We didn't even trust them.
Yeah,
we didn't even ask them.
I'm
They
not
didn't
even
ask
on
us.
Facebook, so
right, so neither am I. But I think that what we have to do now is we have to actually stand up
and get in their face.
and get in their face. And the people who have to do that are people who are smart. A lot of it's going to fall on the back of education, higher education, because I don't believe that it will be led by the government until we actually force them. And there's not enough people out there to do that. So
just one thing. Just a quick follow-up, a little career counseling.
Yeah.
A lot of students here. You've been a big employer, hired a lot of people. Going into this age of AI, what would be your advice to a student of the kind of background that you would be looking for as an employer?
I want someone who believes that nothing is inevitable. I want someone who believes that nothing is inevitable, that their involvement, their engagement, their contributions to the solution will make the solution a better place. People who walk into my company, any of the companies who actually believe that there's this thing that's set up and all I have to do is fit in, I want them to leave tomorrow. I want people who walk in and say, there's a way to make it better. And it's not technical, it's not scientific necessarily, it's not even social. It's active engagement, it's a little bit of broad knowledge and responsibility to other people. And we have, it is amazing, we have these amazingly rich people, that's why I love you, Steve, who literally own the world, 1%, 99.9%, and the idea that there is nothing that they can do to make it better is a false idea. We don't only need them, we need literally the guy who comes to work tomorrow for Vion or for Xerox or for MIT to actually believe that nothing is inevitable, that better is possible, and I want them to work towards that.
That's a great job offer. Jennifer,
I just wanted to comment because there is a nascent field that I hope will be very well represented in the new College of Computing. In my labs, we call it FATE, fairness, accountability, which is really being able to audit the outcome, transparency, so in interpretability when someone is not granted bail, hopefully you haven't used deep learning, but you've used something which is interpretable, and ethics. They put ethics on the end because otherwise there's a conference called FAT, which doesn't sound so good. Okay, but anyway, so there are already 2 conferences, academic conferences in this area. There's the FAT Star Conference, and there's AI ethics, ethics and society. And these nascent fields are bringing together legal scholars, ethicists, social scientists, and people in AI, and asking, how do we make some of these decisions in a more equitable fashion? So I'm very excited. I mean, I personally have done something which we call algorithmic greenlining. So we take a population, you're going to let people into school, or you're going to grant them loans, or you're going to do something, and how do I take that objective function, which, as you said, if we don't watch out, we just optimize to some objective function which amplifies this. I mean, it's really simple math. It just amplifies the inequities in the data. And instead, we have some diversity component, or we have some fairness component, which has to come from interactions with social scientists, ethicists, and give you an outcome which is fair according to this. And so there is a nascent field, and I think that the College of Computing is an ideal place to really grow this field, the interaction of, the computer scientists and SHAS and the other part. So I just wanted to say, it's not like no one is looking at this, but it's nascent, and it is something that I think all undergraduates should learn about to help them when they hear about the predictions of AI, have them question those predictions.
But it can't happen without universities taking the lead.
Absolutely.
And the challenge for universities that Raphael has unlocked, because I've talked to dozens of university presidents, is that the nature of the problem to be solved requires synthetic thinking across all disciplines. Right. And when you talk to a provost or a university president, they say, with the door closed, we're not set up to work that way. And so I literally have had presidents say, this is a powerful idea, but the fight that I will have to have with my deans and faculty over this cross-campus learning and structures that will need to be created is too big a fight for me. And so the brilliance and the potential here is that this new college is starting from scratch, and it can build all of the disciplines. And that's the challenge, right? And so that's why what MIT is doing is going to set the pace for every other university that wants to be relevant in the future.
One of the, my motto in doing journalism is from my teacher, Lynn Wells, who said, never think in the box, never think out of the box. Today, you have to think without a box. Exactly. So if you are not, in my case, arbitraging what's going on in climate, what's going on in technology, what's going on in globalization, what's going on in business, you're going to miss the story. I'll give you an example. The revolution in Syria. The revolution in Syria actually began with the worst 4-year drought in Syria's modern history between 2006 and 2010, where 1 million Syrian farmers and herders left their homes, flocked to the cities, lived on the margins of these cities. Assad did nothing for them. Then they got connected on cell phones, and the Arab Spring happened. The whole thing was a complete melange of market Mother Nature and Moore's Law blowing the lid off the place. And if you're just my background, I got my BA in Arabic and Middle East history. If I'd stayed there, I would never have understood what's going on. Ash, I'm really glad that I live in a country where engineers at one of our biggest tech firms would say, don't want my work going into weapons that are going to kill people. I'm also really glad I live in a country protected by the Pentagon, the US Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, because there are people who want to destroy our freedoms. How do you resolve that?
Well, you're referring to the project
Google,
even at Google. And here's how, if they were those, which was not all Google employees, but some Google employees, the first thing I'd say is, listen, I respect that. At least you're thinking ethically. I'm going to come to a different place with that chain of reasoning, but good on you, because you're thinking about the morality of what you're doing. And by the way, think about that with respect to everything else you're doing. It's not that just if you're working for the Defense Department, suddenly moral weight falls upon you. Moral weight falls upon you whenever you're doing anything consequential. Now for defense, I'll just say one thing about defense, and then I want to offer a little hope here.
Please.
And sort of how-tos that I've learned over the course of a long career in technology, not just defense. But 7 years ago, 2012, before all this discussion went on, I was the number 2 in the Department of Defense. And I issued a directive addressing the issue with respect to autonomous weapons that is still in force. And what it says is that there will not be autonomous lethal systems in our future. that any decision to use lethal force, which is a grave matter on behalf of our people, there must be a human being involved in the decision making. I didn't say in the loop because those of you who understand technically that's not actually literally the right formulation, but a human being involved in decision making. Nobody paid any attention to it at the time, but that is the extant guidance in the Department of Defense and the right guidance. So the first thing I'd remind them, if they didn't know, was that. But more fundamentally, I'd say this. Look, early in my career, I was brought up by the Manhattan Project scientists, and they said, get in the game. This is too big a deal for you to stand on the sidelines. So I'd say, first of all, good on you, you're thinking morally. But secondly, you're headed in the wrong direction. If you want us to do the right thing, it's our government. It's the only government you got. You can't walk down the street and go to shop at another government. Get in the game, make us do the right thing, bring your knowledge to that. And also, I might say, and that takes us in a whole different direction, how do you like working for the PLA? Because you do that, and over there you can't tell.
The People's Liberation Army.
The People's Liberation Army, and that is.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm somebody who's worked with the Chinese a long time. I don't mean I want to see a Cold War between the United States and China, but it's a communist dictatorship. And their intent upon using AI as an instrument of control, those are not the American values that I think are important. Now, to what to do about it, I mean, yes, educating our students, that's why I'm here. Because I want to respond to that exact desire of those young people to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? Are we doing the right thing? But give them something to work with. Here are some things to work with. Accountability has been discussed here, and as an algorithmic matter, if you know how these things work, that is an automatic. It needs to be a design criterion for people who are designing AI. You need to say, but you need to build that in. I realize that's difficult, but I've been running technology programs for my whole career. And I've heard plenty of engineers say they couldn't do something when they didn't want to do something. And so I would say, you're not, if you don't do it, I ain't buying it, if you don't put it in there. And then Darren was speaking very eloquently about AI as an amplifier of crummy data. And there need to be data standards and transparency there as well. Otherwise, you're just massaging yesterday into a perfected version of then rather than creating tomorrow. That is something that is doable. And the last thing is I'll say to Congress, that was a big, that day will go down in my personal mental history as one of the greatest missed opportunities in our collective history. Because imagine a different hearing. Imagine a hearing in which the members asked, and I've been joking that I wish they had been that poorly briefed when they asked me about issues of War and Peace, my own many testimonies, as they were asking Mark Zuckerberg about technology. There's something that can be done about. And he, for his part, didn't pass the test of history, in my judgment. I think against him personally. But that's not going to fly, that accounting for the ethical behavior of what you've done. For the members, I've seen it work differently, and you're right. Darren's exactly right. There are people behind them. Where do they come from? In my experience in technology, in addition to having some people who know how to do the mix, which is what we're all about now and what the Schwarzman College of Computing is all about, a mechanism that works well for Congress. I was part of once upon a time for one instance and it has a few ingredients. The first is the members have to really want the information. And now that's not true about everything. So you're not gonna, I'm sorry to say, you're not gonna be able to do a scientific advisory piece of work on some subjects where they don't want to hear. But here, this is something that is not yet partisan, whatever that would even mean in this area, that is not yet polarized. They genuinely wonder. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you need to have something that is demonstrably not only expert, but monitored, usually that you get some wise group of people to oversee it and assure the members it hasn't gone off track. And the last thing, and this is really crucial, Tom, is these people are find it much easier to digest choices and options than they do an answer. So here's what you do. You say, here are some different ways you can go about accomplishing this. But they're all technically well-grounded, but they differ in respectable ways from one another, and then they can do what they do best, which is apply their broad values and experience to represent the people back home. Now, when you frame things that way, it goes down a lot easier. And secondly, you find that 80% of the content is actually in the common findings that are behind all of the choices. And that's a great healing and coming together factor. So for all these things, I mean, I'm just saying, there are ways to, not only do we need new kids who get it and they're spirited, and I'm so glad for this generation, which feels the way they do, but you can give them something to go on. And the reason I was comfortable, just to get back to your original question, with that directive way back in 2012 was I knew I wasn't whistling in the wind. I didn't only have confidence in the morality of it, I had confidence in the doability of it. So this is doable, darn it, and we can't have otherwise.
How doable is it to really substantially increase the representation of women and minorities in CS, AI, and what's the Schwarzman School's plan for that? Megan.
Okay. There are plenty of people who could be in this faculty. So we could gender balance, race balance, geo balance, topic balance this faculty. It's 2019, there's no question. It's just a question of how good are we at finding the talent that definitely exists. I'd be happy to help. It's there and we can do that, and it's one of the most important things we can do because we can set this team up to be the right kind of broad faculty thinking broadly coming from all over the world, right? There's no question.
I think it is absolutely required that we approach this from a completely different point of view. And that point of view is one, just what we have to approach it that the outcome has to be X. This is not, we're going to try to figure out a way to not hurt anybody's feelings, and we're going to do the right laws and whatever the heck it is to make people tenured. I think if we do that, we know the outcome. The outcome will be majority male. It will be an age swing that's pretty skewed towards older. It will, so I think but we have to be willing to do it. It's like Darren said it. Darren said, you go to the universities and they say, well, I can't do that. I know it's the right thing to do, but I can't do that because I would have to fight with my A, B, C, D, E. I say, well, we should fight with them.
But Ursula, I think we have to be very careful because we have allowed a narrative that is about political correctness.
Absolutely.
This is about excellence.
Right.
Yeah, excellent.
And so we
there
need
are
to talk
excellent
about
people.
excellence and stop talking about we need this many blacks, this many, yes, we need to, but this is about excellence.
And you can find them everywhere, by the way.
So this is where my algorithmic greenlining came from. I have a few heuristics. I have much more diverse labs than almost any other technical labs that I know of at any companies. I have more women, I have more people of color. We have more LGBT. And so what do? If I'm looking for somebody in machine learning, I have a little heuristic in my mind. I've seen people go from information retrieval into machine learning. I've seen them go from information systems into machine learning. So I don't lower the standards, for God's sake. I broaden the scope of what I'm looking for. And that was where the algorithmic greenlining came from, because I have a few heuristics I've developed over a couple of decades. I want AI to look at the very high dimensional space and search it and see what are the areas, so I get a Pareto curve if you want to be technical, what are the ways that I can change the criteria that will get me the most gender diverse, racially diverse, et cetera. So I want AI to be so much smarter than me in this high dimensional space. So I think it is doable. It's absolutely doable. And there are, in fact, technical solutions if we make sure that we are talking to the people who understand the social implications.
I think you've hit a good nerve in all of us. It's a nerve for me too. And when I opened up all military specialties to women, there were people who say, you get members of Congress, and so they say, well, you know, we need a military. You can't be running social policy there. And I would say, you don't get it. I said exactly what Darren said. This is half the population. Right. I am an all-volunteer force. I need excellence. For me to take half the population off the table would be contrary to mission effectiveness. And I can't do that. So you're not only wrong, you're upside down in framing it that way. And the second thing I'd say, Tom, to what everybody else has said, this is again an area where it's not like we don't know how to do this. There's tradecraft out there. And, you know, if you despair of some of these things, I had, you know, and these are not things you want to have to learn to be good at, but when it came to sexual assault, post-traumatic stress, there are various things that arise in the environment I used to run, just as there is in the environments of everybody else. And sometimes we wrote the playbook, which I'm proud to say, because we tried hard to learn and do better and improve ourselves. In other places, you could go out and there's a playbook. So the idea that there isn't a way to increase diversity in senior leadership ranks in companies, I think is rubbish. I think there are proven ways. Go out there and find out what people have done. And you don't have to invent it all yourself.
Tom, can I just give us one reason to feel hopeful?
Yes.
Because this
and you're going to close it.
I would hate for us to leave this not feeling hopeful, especially
Bless
the
your
creation
heart.
of this moment. There is a solution here. In the 1960s, what we think of today in the law, I was trained as a lawyer, as public interest law did not exist. If you were a young aspiring lawyer and you were leaving law school, you went to work for a law firm or a corporation or maybe the government. There was no such thing as public interest law. And law schools didn't have a curriculum. Well, that changed in part because of an intervention of a group of philanthropists, foundations, including the Ford Foundation, to create intentionally a new system. That can be done, and actually MIT is going to be the anchor of what we will know in this society as public interest technology.
Right.
On the Hill, there is something called Tech Congress. On the Hill, there is something called Tech Congress. A group of foundations are funding young, bright PhDs, MAs in NCS to work on the Hill for Congress people. There are a number of philanthropists. We need more to join us in this venture. And there are a number of efforts like that that are inputted into this ecosystem to do exactly what you're saying, JD, to actually transform that system to serve in the public interest.
Darren, that's a great, I think, setup for the close, because unfortunately I have to catch a plane. But I just want to say that when Raphael called me and said, I want you to do this in the seminar, blah, 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 I really didn't know. When Raphael calls, I say, aye, sir, and I'll be there.
That's why we're all here.
But I'm so impressed by what I've heard today. I'm so excited about this school. I think it is so cool. Steve, you know, you and Christina doing the Lord's work. Raphael, I salute you. It was a privilege to be there today.